Well, last week, Susan almost made it through the end of chapter 20. Only one last section. So could I get somebody to read Matthew 20, verses 29 through 34?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
If I put on the right glasses, I'll do it.
We understand.
All right. When they were leaving Jericho, a great crowd followed him. And look, you, two blind men were sitting by the roadside. And when they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted out, "Lord, have pity on us, you son of David." The crowd rebuked them so that they might be silent. Jesus stood and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he said. "Lord," they said, "what we want is that your eyes should be open, that our eyes should be open." Jesus was moved with compassion to the depths of his being and touched their eyes, and immediately they recovered their sight and followed him.
Okay, here's a story of two men looking for a miracle, and they found it. And Barclay has a few comments, as usual. He says they were waiting, and when their chance came, they grabbed it. And he talks about how it's not unusual in life that you get an opportunity, and if you don't grab it when it shows up, that you only get the one chance. And that these two men saw the chance, they took it, even though people were trying to shush them. So do any of you have stories in your life where there's been an opportunity and you either took it and are glad you did, or you didn't take it thinking you could do it later and later never got here?
Mm-hmm. I think that what comes to my mind is when we go to, we've been to a number of funerals at church, where we've always known this person, but we never knew this person. You know, we realize, I think with Chris Bates,
Yeah.
with Chris Bates, you know, we'd been friends, we'd seen him, we talked with him, but when we heard all about his life, it was like, boy, I wish I'd gotten to know him better.
Yeah.
You know, and there have been a number of people when you find at church, it's just, I wish I had gone out to dinner with them. I wish I had done, you know, learned a little bit more about this person.
Philip Burkhalter was, I think, maybe not an Olympic swimmer, but very near it in his college days, and just things like that. It's like, you know, Philip as an older person, and
Good morning, Barbara.
all kind of fascinating things about people.
Hey, good morning, Barbara and Bernie and Gail, and I'm assuming Harold is there too.
Well, Harold's on his way, but yes, I'll tell him. He's a little slower than me.
But I wanted to go back and touch on this statement that they said, what we want is that our eyes should be opened. And I think that was, I read that as a physical thing that happened, but I also read that as a metaphorical thing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I expect we could all pray for that. And good morning, Kitty Cat.
That's
Yeah.
Piper.
Okay,
The
Piper.
25-pound wonder.
I know there's been plenty of missed opportunities, but you know, I'm not good at remembering what happened yesterday, let alone what happened 30 years ago and the past 30 years. And I can think. I went yesterday to my step granddaughter's wedding, and so thinking about a number of missed opportunities for me to strengthen those relationships and maintain. I mean, we still have a good relationship, but opportunities that I've missed. So.
Yeah, and talking about, you know, what Bud and Susan were talking about, almost every funeral that I go to that Cindy preaches, I leave wishing I had known that person better. It's just
Mhm.
Cindy brings them to life. But I had dinner last night with one of my twin friends that y'all hear me talk about. She came over here. We were going to work on name tags for the high school reunion. We ended up visiting and not much work got done. But at some point while we were having dinner, I don't remember what we were talking about, but she looked at me and said, I'm still learning things about you. And we've known each other for 60 years.
Hmm.
So, I think you have to make those opportunities to really get to know people.
I think it's interesting to note too that the two men were waiting, but they were waiting in the right place. And how can we make sure we're waiting in the right place?
Mm,
Mhm.
mhm.
I think some of that has to be faith, that we put ourselves out there and trust in God to put the opportunities where we are. Because
And
other
a
than that, I don't.
flashback of the Tom Hanks movie where he was stranded on an island, and he said, "You never know what the tide will bring." And you can go out the door with a plan to do one thing, and something happens and your whole day changes. And that might mean meeting somebody or having an opportunity to help somebody or
And
do
maybe,
whatever.
and maybe wherever you are waiting, that God will make some opportunity for you. No matter where you are, that opportunity will come. You just have to recognize it and be open to it.
Right. You can't catch them all.
There was
No.
a story that I heard on, I was watching the Perot series, Agatha Christie, and there's one of the stories where they talk about a man, and it's a story about a man, and he goes to Damascus and he meets death, and and death sees him, and he runs and gets on a horse and rides to Samaria, and he gets down for a drink of water, and death's waiting for him there. And he says, I'm so surprised you were waiting for me in Damascus. And he says, well, I was surprised to see you there too, because I was really going to meet with you in Samaria. So it's that opportunity, you don't know when fate is supposed to come to you, and can you really control it? You try to ignore it, and you're really going right into, going the right direction to end up there anyway.
Yeah. The other thing that Barclay talks about these two guys is that they could not be discouraged. How often do we start something and somebody goes, no, you can't do that, or stop, or whatever. And do we push on, or do we let them stop us? And I remember one thing that I've had to learn in my adult life, my dad used to tell me that he was going to say something once, and that was going to be it. And if I had the sense enough to listen to him, that was fine. And if I didn't, that was fine. It was, if I wanted to learn the hard way, he'd let me. And so I kind of grew up with that was how adults were. So I never pushed beyond the first no. And then I've learned as an adult that you can push beyond that first no. You don't have to take no at face value or whatever. So, it was so thoroughly ingrained in me, it's been a hard thing for me to learn. Which leads me to the next statement that I wanted to point out in Barclay. It often happens that we are easily discouraged from seeking the presence of God. So,
And what
And then-
does that? What discourages us from doing that?
the weather's good, so I'm not going to church. It's raining, so I'm not going to church. Cindy's not preaching, so I'm not going to church.
If God had given me a better memory, I'd remember to be here every Sunday.
But the presence of God is just not in church.
If we served beer.
Right, yeah, yep, Nancy, I'm right in there with you that God's presence isn't just on Sunday mornings in the sanctuary. It's what discourages me. Oh, I think I'll just sit here and watch, Jeopardy instead of getting up and going out and sitting in my chair in the backyard, where I can really think. Yeah.
Well, the optimist would say that God's pleasures that he gives us discourage us from seeking him.
Hmm.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or is that the pessimist? Not sure.
Oh.
Well, y'all are deep this morning.
Oh, we're deep in it.
And this next statement that I'm going to read from Barclay, I made a note that personally, I thought this was a strange thing to say. These two men had an imperfect faith, but they were determined to act on the faith they had. And my thought was, we all have imperfect faith. What is perfect faith?
Yeah.
And who would have perfect faith? Even Mother Teresa struggled with her faith.
Mhm.
So I just thought it was a strange thing for Barclay to say.
As I recall, one of those conversation with God books, it was either the first or the second one, I think, had a section where it talked about instead of asking for things and praying for things, you're so sure that your prayer is going to be answered that you say thank you before it happens. And I thought to myself, I am so far from that.
Yeah, it's the action of wanting makes you want more, and so to pray, I want something, or I want this and I want that God answers your prayer. Okay, so you want it, but be thankful for what you have, then that more will come of what you.
Well, this was being thankful before the prayer had been answered, that your confidence in it was going to be answered was so great that you would say, for example, thank you for bringing Leah's mother successfully through her medical situation, as opposed to please be with her and heal her. You're so confident that it's going to happen that you're saying thank you for healing her. And I'm not there.
Well, only one that was there, I think, was Christ himself.
Yeah.
Who had that much faith.
Yeah. And that goes into the next comment from Barclay, that the two men were not afraid to make a great request, which, is in the same terms, and that they were grateful.
And they called him Son of David.
Yes.
So they were recognizing him as Messiah.
Yes, although Barclay points out that by using that terminology, they were recognizing him as an earthly Messiah. But still, yes, they did recognize him. So we should always be grateful. I've told y'all that, part of my morning routine is to go out and get the newspaper. And it's a long walk from my front door to the end of the driveway. And I have a prayer. And part of my prayer is thank you. Okay, Nancy. Is thanking God for all of my blessings, the ones I like, the ones I don't, and the ones I'm aware of, and the ones I'll never think about. Because I figure that covers everything. And I want God to know that I recognize that I am very, very blessed. Okay. Any other comments about this section or anything from last week in chapter 20? So we're ready to start the beginning of the last act of the trauma, is how Barclay titles chapter 21. So could somebody read verses 1 through 11 for me?
I can do it.
Okay.
So when they had come near to Jerusalem, and when they had come to Bethpage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent on 2 disciples ahead. Go into the village which is facing you, he said, and immediately you will find an ass tethered and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, say, the master needs them. Immediately he will send them on. This was done that there might be fulfilled that which was spoken through the prophet when he said, say to the daughter of Zion, look, your king comes to you, gentle and riding upon an ass, and a colt, the foal of a beast who bears the yoke. So the disciples went, and they carried out Jesus's orders, and they brought the ass and the colt, and put their cloaks upon them, and he took his seat on them. The very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road. Others cut down branches from the trees and strewed them on the road. And the crowds who went in front and followed behind kept shouting, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed in the name of the Lord is he who comes. Hosanna in the highest. And as he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was shaken. Who is this? They asked. And the crowd said, this is the prophet Jesus, who comes from Nazareth in Galilee. Well, I wasn't ready for this story. I wasn't ready for Palm Sunday.
Wrong time of year, huh?
I know.
Oh, well.
Well, you can tell I wasn't reading ahead, that I wasn't prepared for this.
That's
Okay,
chapter
Barclay.
21. We're in the
Yep, the
climax
last,
here.
yeah. Y'all know how I love statistics and numbers. Barclay starts off with one that fascinated me, that about 30 years after this story, a Roman governor took a census of the lambs that were killed in Jerusalem for Passover, and came up with a number of 250,000 lambs killed for Passover. And that there was a law for the Jews that there had to be at least a group of 10 people for each lamb.
What?
Which
I'm
meant,
like 2.5 million people?
yeah. Yeah, I kind of, that's more than I can handle too, because, you know, I've got this picture of Jerusalem being a fairly small little town and 2.5 million people and 250,000 lambs. Just,
I mean, that's double
Someone's
Richmond's
got their numbers
population.
screwed up.
Richmond's metropolitan population.
Of the whole
Yeah.
area was that much.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, everyone's coming, but everyone's coming from everywhere. But could they even sustain that many people? You know,
Right.
with water and
Porta
food.
potties.
How much space would that many lambs take up? How many acres would it?
Porta-johns, yeah.
How many porta johns would they?
yeah, that was my problem with this, was, you know, the logistics of it. But anyway, you know, that's how he starts his discussion here. He goes on to say Jesus could not have chosen a more dramatic moment because the city was full of people. They're keyed up with religious expectations. And also, it's very obvious that this was planned in advance. You know, that he had already made arrangements with the owner of the animals and had a password so that the owner knew when to let him go. And then he makes a point that we pronounce Bethpage incorrectly, and I don't really care about that. because I couldn't figure
Well,
out.
I
who
got
was-
to interject at this point. The church that my ex-husband grew up in out in Louisa is Bethpage Christian Church. Used to be a disciple. I'm not sure if it's even a functional church anymore, but they spelled it this way. And for years I thought, why did they misspell it?
Well, we also are mispronouncing it. That it's the end of the word should not sound like age. And
Okay.
yeah, kind of the top of page 278. The end is pronounced as AE. So anyway.
Bethpage.
Or Paj.
Yeah, so anyway, we're not saying it right.
We pronounce everything wrong anyway.
Yeah, I know. So then he goes on and says that in Mark's gospel, Mark adds the detail that the donkey had never been ridden before, and that in that culture, to use something for the first time was an indication that it had been saved for a sacred purpose. You know, that, and that made it especially suitable here.
Well, there's more meaning to that because a friend of mine, when I was growing up, his grandfather would get cattle shipped in, and I don't know why, but he would always bring in a few of these donkeys that had never been ridden, and we would go out and ride them. And I can tell you that when you get on one of those things the first time, they're not gently going down the street.
I had wondered about that, yes. And then the crowd receives him like a king. And this is reminiscent of what they did when Simon Maccabeus entered Jerusalem after one of his most notable victories, that people had put palm branches on the road for him. And they shouted the word Hosanna. And so this was new to me. The word Hosanna originally meant or means save me or save now. And so it would have been a cry for help with the people in distress, but he postulates that perhaps the word had changed some of its meaning, you know, and we've seen that happen in our lifetimes. And maybe it had become just a cry of welcome and acclamation, you know, hail, you know, great Messiah or something, rather than save me.
It was Hail Holy One was what I was taught it was meant to say.
Okay.
Hail Holy One. That's a Catholic definition, and we can blame the Pope if it's wrong.
Well, and he talks about how it kind of evolved into that, which words, you know, the meanings of words do evolve over time.
And then he goes on to talk about how prophets, anytime a prophet felt like their words were having no effect, that they would put their message into a dramatic act, which people could not fail to see and understand. And he tells two different stories. One was back in, well, actually, both of them are Old Testament stories. When it became clear that the kingdom would not stand the excesses and extravagances of King Rehoboam, and that Jeroboam was marked out as the rising power, the prophet Ahijah the Silonite put on a new garment and then went to Jeroboam and cut the garment into 12 pieces, symbolizing the 12 tribes, and gave 2 to Jeroboam and 10 to Rehoboam, and the other guy, saying that the 2 tribes would follow one and the other. The other 10 would go with the other guy. And then Jeremiah was convinced that Babylon was about to conquer Palestine at a time when everybody there just knew that life was good, it was going to continue, there was not going to be any problem. And so he sent a yoke to Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon. and then put a yoke on his own neck that all could see. And then Hananiah, who was a false prophet with mistaken optimism, wanted to show he disagreed with it. He took the yoke off of Jeremiah and smashed it. So if the words are not being paid any attention to, prophets have a way of being dramatic. So Barclay is making the point that Jesus is being dramatic at this point to make a point.
I guess I always thought that this was just another one of Matthew's way of pointing toward Jesus from something that was said by the prophets with coming into Jerusalem riding on an ass, you know, that it was just trying to fulfill the prophecies.
That's possible. You know, Barclay does have a way of really stretching a point sometimes. But he makes us think. So another thing, another intention that might have been in Jesus's mind was to replay a time, and he talks about going back in history when Jerusalem had been taken over by Antiochus Epiphanes about 175 BC, and he was determined to stamp out Judaism. I don't remember this story at all. And he came in and wanted Greek culture and brought pigs into the temple, made some of the outbuildings, brothels, and just totally desecrated the temple. And then the Maccabees came back and reclaimed it. And it was purified and rededicated. And so Jesus may be wanting to, the way he's coming into town, wanting to remind people of that. Then he says, let us look at Jesus in this setting. It shows three things about Jesus. It shows us his courage, because he knows he's walking into a hornet's nest. Barclay makes the statement that a lot of people would say that, you know, discretion is the better part of valor. And if they'd gone at all, they would have gone in quietly and stayed hidden. Jesus walks in the most dramatic way he could think of. There was no way to miss him. Although I have to say that my 21st century brain wonders how word of this will get through 2.5 million people, assuming there really are that many people, without benefit of mass media of any sort.
Also,
You know,
it goes fast.
Apparently so. And but then I also think about the word, you know, that game, that party game where you whisper something and by the time it gets back to you, it doesn't sound at all like what you started. So if it was all word of mouth, how badly skewed was the story by the time it was, you know, 10 people out? But that's just, you know, that's how my brain's working. It also shows us his claim. He's definitely claiming to be God's Messiah, the anointed one. And Barclay makes this statement with Jesus, it's all or nothing. People must acknowledge him as king or not receive him at all. I have issues with that statement. I don't think, and this is just me, I think there's very little in life that's all or nothing. But anyway. And then lastly, it shows his appeal. It was not the kingship of the throne he claimed, it was kingship of the heart. And he came humbly riding a donkey. And Barclay makes a point that anytime a ruler is riding a donkey, it's a sign of peace. That the horse was considered an animal of war. So, you know, we think of donkeys as just, you know, farm animals and they're not highly regarded. But in that culture, they did carry the symbolism of peace.
Yeah, because you don't really have, like Bud was saying, it sounds like you don't really have good control over a donkey.
Well, a donkey, you know, it doesn't want to do something, and it's pretty hard to get it to do something
Mhm. Mhm.
that you don't want it, that it doesn't want to do.
I
Right.
know mules are like that, but are donkeys?
Yes.
You bet, yeah.
Okay.
It'll sit down.
Oh, okay. I have no experience with donkeys.
You've seen, probably seen lots of pictures of little donkeys just sitting down.
And they kick too.
My stepfather kept a donkey in the field with cows because he said that they were a better alarm system for wild animals than
Mhm.
the cows would be.
Mhm.
Maybe that's why the guy.
Yeah, I've never been on a donkey, never dealt with them, but I've dealt with a bunch of asses over my lifetime.
Oh.
As have we all. Oh, that's
Sorry.
okay. No, I enjoy your comments. Okay, I'll read this next passage. It's short, and then I'm gonna share my screen. I have a picture to show you. As Jesus entered into the precincts of the temple of God and cast out all who were selling and buying in the temple precincts, and overturned the tables of the money changers and of those who were selling doves, it is written, he said to them, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a robber's cave. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. So let me see if I can share my screen here. Because I found a
Photograph.
photograph. Yes, I did. Oh, wait a minute.
Actual
An
photograph
actual photo.
taken on site.
Yeah. Okay, I may have done this wrong.
You just share screen.
Well, I see, but I can't.
There we go.
Okay, okay, hold on. Okay, y'all got that?
There you
Got
go.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the wrong one. Hold on, that's the next one.
You're rich.
Okay. This is obviously very small. This is the court of the Gentiles, and it goes all the way around. So in terms of square footage, the court of the Gentiles is the largest. And so anybody was able to go here. And according to Barclay, this is where the money changers were. But if you read, there's a very detailed description about the temple below the graphic here. It says that the money changers were in the court of the women. So, you know, I've got two different sources putting them in different places. But the point is that there was a lot of activity here.
Mhm.
Well, and here it says he entered into the precincts of the temple of God and cast
Right,
out
so-
all who were selling.
Yeah, so, you know, they were in the neighborhood, in the building. And I think I remember from somewhere else that this entire graphic would have been the size of 3 football fields. So it's huge. And he also points out that there are 2 different Greek words used for what we call the temple. And one is for the temple precincts, the whole thing. And that word is, and now Hieron, Hieron. And then there's another word for just the Holy of Holies, which only the high priest can enter and only on the Day of Atonement. And that's called naos. So when you see the word temple, you have to, you know, pay attention to how it's being used, because we don't have 2 different words for 2 different spaces there. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. In this court of the Gentiles, two kinds of trading were going on. Number one was money changing. Every Jew had to pay a temple tax of 1/2 shekel, and that was what the money was. So I'll share screen again. Okay, so that's the coin that would have been used at the time of Jesus. And a month before the tax was due, booths would have been set up in towns and villages all over the land. But if you didn't pay it by a certain period of time, you had to go to Jerusalem to pay it. And so there would have been lots of folks there, and it had to be paid in this currency, even though other currency was perfectly good for other purposes. So there were money changers there, and they served a purpose. You know, if you needed to change currency, you had to find somebody to do it. The problem is that a lot of the money changers took advantage of the situation. They charged a fee for performing the service. And then if you were owed change, they would charge you a fee for giving you change. And so Jesus was upset because the poor people were being taken advantage of.
Sounds like similar to payday loans.
Yes.
Well, it takes me back to our first trip to Scotland when we had traveler's checks. And then you had to change for the money there, and there was a fee and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably paid a fee to get the traveler's checks before you left.
I think so. I forget how it worked, but you know, I'm sure there was something like that.
Yeah. So Barclay makes the point that not all of the money changers would have been taking advantage of folks, but it was such an easy way for greed to come into the system. And then another thing was that if you needed a dove for a sacrifice, you could buy doves outside of the temple grounds. But whatever you gave for a sacrifice had to be unblemished. It had to be perfect. And there were inspectors to inspect what you were giving for a sacrifice. And they would, if you bought it outside the grounds, they could say, no, this is not perfect. You need to buy one over there. And that one over there may cost as much as 15 times what you paid for this one off the grounds. So there were two different ways that the poor people could be taken advantage of financially as they tried to follow the law. And then I thought this was interesting because when we hear this story, we assume that the money changers are pocketing all of those fees. And according to Barclay, that's not true. The surplus charge was called the kolbun. It did not by any means all go into the money changers' pockets. Some of it was classed as free will offerings. Some of it went to the repair of the roads. Some of it went to purchase the gold plates with which it was planned entirely to cover the temple proper, and some of it found its way into the temple treasury. The whole matter was not necessarily an abuse, but the trouble was that it lent itself to abuse. It lent itself to the exploitation of the pilgrims. And there is no doubt that the money changers did make profits, but not all of it went into their pockets. So that was new for me. And George Adams Smith, who was a biblical scholar, made the statement that in those days, every priest must have been a traitor. There was every danger of shameless exploitation of poor pilgrims. And that's what made Jesus so angry.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Send me your
Word
love.
of warning to the church. What'd you say, Bud?
Just send me your love offering.
Well, and to think, but think about it on the other hand, you've got people coming there to offer a service of money changing. And so you would expect them to get paid some way, unless they were being paid by the temple to be there as money changers. You know, somebody's got to pay for someone sitting there for a week at a time, you know, or the time that they're there.
right. And
It's like someone selling food. Do you expect them to be giving it away or?
no, but you also, you know, it's, and this is not a great, maybe it is a great analogy. I don't know. Popcorn is extremely cheap until you want it in the movie theater.
Mhm.
You know, so they're paying an exorbitant amount of money because they've kind of got you captive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the problem here. Yes, it was a service that was needed. They were just charging a whole lot more for the service than was necessary. And again, not all of them were taking advantage of the pilgrims, but it was very easy to abuse the system. And, you know, we're old enough to know that where abuse is possible, especially when there's money involved, abuse is going to happen. You know, especially when you're taking advantage of poor people who have no recourse. They're stuck. Then on the other hand, Barclay goes on and says that we need to be very careful, and we pretty much already discussed that not everybody was doing wrong, and that, you know, we shouldn't get too judgmental about that. And in other words, let the individual and the church without sin cast the first stone.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all seen issues there. This incident shows us certain things about Jesus. It's one of the fiercest manifestations of his anger directed against those who exploited other people, and especially those who exploited in the name of religion.
I can't help but wonder what Jesus would say about the prosperity gospel today, those preaching the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
I really wonder what he would say. And some of the televangelists.
Yeah.
What is the basis of that, Kathy? I don't watch too many televangelists, so I'm not sure.
I haven't watched a whole lot of it because it upsets me so much. But it's like, you know, you believe in God and these good things, you'll get that new car, you'll get that new job, you'll get, you know, all the things that you want, that you're asking for. All you have to do is ask and it will happen to you. And there doesn't seem to be much in the way of how you behave and how you treat other people and how you honor God. It's you do this and you get. Or I get, you know, like Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, you know, he's still on TV. She died a few years ago, but he's still out there on TV. At one point he was selling, early in the pandemic, he was selling some kind of health kit to keep you from getting COVID. He was doing that kind of stuff. So,
Modern day version of snake oil.
and beyond.
Who was the guy that had the key? You had to get the key. Was that not Oral Roberts, but somebody else? If you had a key and you held it while you prayed, It was back in the Ernest Ainsley days.
Oh, I think Ernest is still alive too. Ernest has had accusations of sexual abuse in recent years. I went to see him one time. He came to Winston-Salem. Went to see what kind of circus rodeo show that was. And it was.
You all have heard me speak before my opinion of Jerry Farwell.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm. Yeah, when that power and that money start really warping.
Yeah, but they're just playing with society. Today, it's the me generation are all in their 30s and 40s having kids and that. So the whole prosperity gospel thing really does attract them. And it's a shame. It's wrong.
Mhm, mhm. Yep, yep, I should have it all. And by golly, if I ask for it and I want it, I should have it.
Yeah, including God.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because I deserve it. I deserve it, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it starts in school. I deserve that passing grade because my butt was in this chair every class period.
Yeah, but I deserve the same grade that you get because we believe in equity.
Yeah.
So don't get a B.
Yeah.
mhm,
This passage also shows us that Jesus' anger was especially directed against those who made it impossible for ordinary people to worship in the house of God. And he goes on to say that we can probably safely assume that not every Gentile was there as a sightseer, that some of them would have come to worship and to pray. And if the noise of the money changers made it impossible, he says God will never hold guiltless those who make it impossible for others to worship. And then he goes on and talks about how basically the politics of running a church can sometimes create the same issues. And then one last note, our passage ends with Jesus healing the blind and the lame in the temple court. Those people were still there. Jesus did not clear everyone out. Only those with guilty consciences fled before the eyes of his wrath. Those who needed him stayed. And it goes on and talks some more. And then his last sentence says, the destructive force of anger must always go hand in hand with the healing power of love.
mm,
And I thought that was a real powerful sentence.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to read it again, and then it'll be time for us to go. The destructive force of anger must always go hand in hand with the healing power of love.
I didn't see that in my dad.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. Any other last comments? Because it's 10:51.
Thank you for the class.
Yes.
Excellent job as always.
Thank you.
What were Gentiles doing in the temple?
Well, there was a court of Gentiles on the outer edge. They were not allowed further in. You went in by, you had Gentiles around the edge, then the women could go into the next area, and then the men could go into the area after that.
Okay, I just wasn't familiar with that. Thank you.
Yeah,
I've been
you're
trying,
welcome.
Bernie, I've been trying to find out who sold a key to hold while prayer, and I haven't been able to find that yet.
Oh, okay. I just remember when I was a kid, back in the 30s.
That's your
Yeah,
homework.
I'm
For,
not sure.
that's your homework for next week.
Yeah. Did you keep it with your decoder ring?
Or the little vial of holy water, you know, that some people would send you. Yeah.
That's right.
The water from the River Jordan, you know.
Yeah.
With those. Yep.
That
Okay.
was
All
German.
right, so
very much.
somebody will have to find out who had the key to prayer.
Yeah. And may God give me a memory next Monday or Sunday.
We'll pray for that, Bernie.
Okay, y'all
Bye,
take,
y'all.
y'all have a good
Bye.
week.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.